I didn't mean to throw you, by the way. Sorry.
I couldn't tell. It was like
Yeah.
I
Well,
thought we were recording, and then I'm
that's the
like,
whole
wait a minute,
thing,
maybe we're
man.
not.
I know you're just like all of a sudden you're like in the middle. Oh, sorry, everybody. Adam Christianson is here with us. Adam Christianson, he of the MacCast. I told you yesterday where to find it, but I'll do it again at MacCast, MACCAST, at MacCast on Twitter or MacCast.com. Yeah, this is the whole thing, man. You're just like all of a sudden you're like, whoa, wait, is this a show? Believe me, 7 months later, I'm asking the same question.
Show.
Thank you. Thank you for your vote of confidence. Okay, so you have not been on this show before. You and I have talked, golly, I actually remember the first time I met you. It was at the podcast, it wasn't even the podcast and New Media Expo. It was the Podcast Expo in Ontario, California in 2005. Because I was still working with Scott Shepard over at Inside Mac. And Scott Shepard had told us that you hated us, which was pretty much Scott's way, because Scott would basically, he would rouse rabble. And I'm not speaking ill of the dead, I'm speaking truth. He would rouse rabble. He was a rabble rouser. That was what he did. And I believe Laura Burstein walked up to you and said, "So you're the enemy." And you were like,
Yeah, that was the quote. I'm like, do I know you?
Right.
Like,
I am? Okay, fine. And so I think that's the first time you and I met. And again, we'll talk more about...
great conversation. It was awesome.
Yeah, well, yeah. And we'll talk more about podcasting later this week again. But one of the things I've done with a lot of people the first time they're on this show is find out what their Apple story is. Because we all know you're an Apple guy. We all know you're a Mac guy. We don't all necessarily know how you ended up on this side of the Windows PC. I don't want to say divide, because again, rabble rousing. But I mean, how you ended up on the Mac side as opposed to on the Windows side or something like that. So how did that start? What was the first Apple thing you did? How did you become not a devotee of computers, but a devotee of Apple and the Mac? Tell us your story.
So that's pretty straightforward. I think it's a matter of timing, because I didn't start out a Mac guy, but I definitely started out an Apple guy, because I grew up in the 80s, and the Apple II and the Apple IIc were the computer of my age, right? And notching floppy disks and getting pirated games with my friends, and all started kind of there, like a lot of kids, computers, playing games. And then you kind of get into them as you get older, and you're like, well, what else can I do with these things? And so I had a group of friends I ran around with, and we did all the things, BMX bikes, and later got into skateboarding, and we did computers and video games, and then we started wanting to kind of figure out, well, can we make our own games? What can we do? And so got into like programming basic and stuff like that, right?
Right.
So teaching yourself that, and it was just really coming out of that. And then 84, the Mac comes along, and my dad was worked in marketing and was kind of a graphic designer and into that sort of thing. And I also wanted to kind of move toward that kind of a career. But the Mac came out, and as you know, it was like this closed system, and it didn't work the same as an Apple. And my dad really wanted to get, for our first home computer, a Mac. My friend David kind of had a Mac, and we actually kind of made fun of him, because it's like, we can't do anything with that. I mean, the cool thing we could do with that was like Mac Paint, right? We could do cool stuff with Mac Paint, but it didn't have the games we liked. It didn't have, we couldn't take our Apple II games or floppies and use it on that. Mm-hmm. And so my dad wanted it as a more of a tool, as a graphic designer tool for like page layout and Illustrator and all that sort of stuff. But it's like, no, I just want to do my programming. So about that time, the 2GS came out, which was going to have a graphical user interface. It was going to be in color, but it was still an Apple II. So I talked my dad into buying an Apple 2GS, and so that's what we ended up having. And so I was really an Apple guy at first, but then when I went to college, again, I was going to study graphic design, specifically book and magazine design. Mm-hmm. And I took my dad's old Mac Plus with me to college, and so that's really where it kind of solidified my love for the Mac. And that college had an amazing new Apple IIFX lab, which at that time that was a $10,000 Mac.
Okay.
And we had this lab full of those with all the latest Adobe software and PageMaker, and it just really allowed me to be creative and to create things and to do the kinds of work and illustration and page layout that I wanted to do. So that's kind of where it all began, really.
That's interesting to me, though, because, I mean, you can still code, right? You're still a developer.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yep.
Because I'll tell you really quickly.
You don't know about my graphic design background, yeah.
Well, no, I know about your graphic design background, but I'll tell you really quickly. My story is sad, stupid, and tragic. Where basically I wrote a program that struck me. It strikes me now as like, why was I even thinking in those terms? But at the time, I was just like, oh, it seems to me. Basically, on my own, I created credit, which obviously already existed, but I didn't know about it, right? And so I had this idea and got lectured by my dad about the Cashless Society and the Book of Revelations. I'm not making this up. And that was the last time I tried to write a program, because it's like, oh, okay, what I'm doing is of the devil, so I'll stop doing that. And, so then a friend of mine, not unlike you, a friend of mine got a Mac, except I didn't have this feeling of I couldn't do anything. I had this feeling of I could do anything because of Mac Paint. And
right.
So, and once Apple starts doing its thing, even though I didn't have my first Mac probably wasn't until 2005, but I just didn't have a computer for most of the time. Every time Apple would introduce something where they were like, and now you can do this, and now you can do this, that to me was just feeding my Jones to be creative, but not have to do, sort of the code monkey stuff behind the scenes. How do you keep doing the graphic stuff where Apple's like, look what you can do, but then also either keep pursuing or get back into the dev side?
Yeah, it was more back into the dev side. So, I ended up being a web developer, and that really came out of the graphic design and the page layout stuff. So what happened after college was I went through a few jobs here and there, ended up in Portland working for an ad agency doing graphic design, basically working with art directors and doing the layouts for ads and things like that we were developing. And so around that time, too, we're talking, mid-90s, and the internet's starting to become a thing, and HTML's starting to become a thing. And so on the side, I would get approached by people because they could tell I was into computers and fixing computers, because I also did kind of IT work for this ad agency. They didn't have a dedicated IT person. So I was the one who knew how to troubleshoot the Macs when they went down and fix font conflicts and could, put SCSI terminators on and figure out SCSI IDs and all the system extension conflicts, all that stuff way back from the early days of Mac that a lot of people probably remember, and it was kind of a giant pain in the butt. But people found out that I was kind of into that, and then so I would get asked, hey, can you build a website? You're pretty good at this page layout stuff. Can you build a website? And I would be like, yes. And then I'd run to the library and get a book on HTML and be like, okay, how do I build a website? And so I kind of faked my way into it, and it just sort of progressed back into the programming. So that got me back into the kind of scripting programming side of things. And then I would get asked for more and more complex things. So like, oh, hey, can you build an email form? Hey, can you build an e-commerce website? And so I'd just like figure it out. I'd go learn, Perl was one of the first languages I learned to do CGI programming, and then I just sort of snowballed after that into PHP and then other kinds of web development. So, yeah, now I do web development more so than the design page layout stuff. But I mean, the concepts are all the same, right? A lot of the things that you're dealing with in terms of like laying out an interface or understanding how people are going to interact with content is very similar from that side of it, and then you get the bonus of having all the back half of it, the backside of it, right? Doing the programming and the development.
So then let's jump ahead 20, 25 years. When you see Apple, I know they say they're not, merging the operating systems. I know technically they're not merging the operating systems, but each operating system keeps borrowing more and more from the other. When you see the iOSification of the Mac OS, which they can say they're not doing that, but they are. When you see that kind of thing, are you like, oh, good, this will make it easier? Or are you like, oh, man, they're boxing me out of this thing that I was finally able to go run around and play in? Like, how do you feel about the way the whole ecosystem is going? Well, I don't want to say the whole ecosystem, actually. Let's just talk about the Mac specifically. How do you feel about the way the Mac is going at this point?
I think it's great. I mean, I think that Apple is definitely moving in that convergence direction. And I think at some point, a Mac and an iPad and an iOS thing and another, we are going to get to that point where it's just, an Apple thing. There's, who knows what the future is going to hold in terms of form factors and stuff like that. But I think it makes sense to bring features and functionality from iOS into Mac, and they borrow from each other. And, definitely I'm not scared of that. I like the way technology is moving into sort of that convergence. I think it makes it easier to use. It makes it easier to go between platforms. And the programming doesn't really change. I don't do Mac apps or iOS apps, but I mean, it's all Swift under the hood. And actually, I think that convergence just makes it easier for developers, especially if they want to have their stuff cross-platform. So I know some developers are a little bit nervous about it, but overall, it seems like when I talk to most of them, they're pretty positive about a lot of those changes.